Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom. Sometimes when I'm talking with my husband, I have my sort of inner monologue going on in my head, the thoughts that sort of emerge unbidden as an inner monologue that kind of goes along with me all day, all the time, whether I want it or not. Does anyone else have their little friend, the inner monologue, that accompanies them everywhere? And so 10 years into our married life, I might be listening to a story that he says, and I also kind of have my own thoughts, like, trucking along in the background. But since he knows me so well, every now and then he will give voice to something that is in the inner monologue that I've been kind of, going off with in my mind before I even have given it words or notice. Whether it's an unvoiced thought or an objection or agreement or a judgment. And it is very frustrating to be so transparent to somebody. And I think most of us have had this experience in one way or another with a friend or a colleague or a parent, child, anybody, and we sort of can sense what's happening on the inside. And every now and then I think the Torah kind of does that too. The narrator of the Torah gives our inner monologue its own voice by quoting what it imagines we are going to say in response to the Torah's teaching. Right? It's a very fascinating technique. The Torah could just kind of tell us something directly, do this, don't do that. But instead, every now and then it kind of raises up the imagined objection and gives voice to them and then preserves the objection in the canon itself. There's a couple examples of this, but I think this week's Parsha has one of my favorites, which is, my favorites in that I think it's very resonant with me, and I think it best describes a very common thought that rises up in most of us and that I think affects everything we do as human beings, from our interpersonal relationships to our politics and everything in between. Moses warns us that when we are about to enter past the Jordan River into the Promised Land, after 40 years of wandering, we are eventually going to acquire vast herds of cattle and silver and gold and food aplenty. We're going to have beautiful homes. Everything is going to be great. And amidst all of our comfort, all of our wealth, we're going to say in our hearts, Kochi ve'otzem yadi asal yadachai alazeh. My power and the might of my own hand have won me all of this chayil, which is sort of wealth or power, or all this stuff. Everything I have came from my own doing. My own doing. Right? Now, obviously, Moses is there to tell us, don't think that, right? But he, when he's giving this over, he voices that thought that he imagines is kind of going off in our head. And we know that the Torah does not waste space. So the fact that it chooses to do this, I think, is really interesting to sort of give us, what's our little inner voice? This little bilvavecha, this thing you're saying in your heart or in your mind. And it's a voice, I think, that haunts us to this very day. Moses was quite prescient. It's the voice that says, mine, mine. For some of the sages in our tradition, this line, right, Kochi ve'otzem yadi, is kind of like the go-to phrase for this sin, the sin of mine, right, and of ingratitude, of forgetting that all things flow from God. So the Mea Shiloach, who's a Rabbi writing in the 19th century in Eastern Europe, kind of sums it up in a way that we probably all understand and in a way that we're all guilty of, I think. He writes, it's human nature to shout and scream at God in difficult moments and to say, what have you done to me? But when God bestows all sorts of good things, a person's eyes are obscured from seeing that they too came from God. Who has ever done that? There should be more hands, but it's okay. You don't have to out yourself. It's okay. It's okay. Our successes are ours, and our failures belong to someone else. Right? This is a very common thing. I'm guilty of it too. This tendency and this voice expresses our desire, I think, to see ourselves as independent, as the center of the universe, to say we are self-sufficient and self-reliant and self-made. It is what the prophet Ezekiel describes as the cardinal sin of Pharaoh, who says in the book of Ezekiel, Li ye'ori va'ani asitani. The Nile is mine. I made it myself. Can you imagine the chutzpah? The chutzpah. For him, all creation exists to serve him. All of it is won by the might of his own hand, and so he might as well have made it all for himself, or at least the Nile, which sustains the entire economy and agriculture of his world. And so if everything is by the might of his own hand, and if everything is for him, by him, made by him, what's the difference between enslaving a few people? It is this type of self-centeredness that becomes not just a kind of idolatry, imagining you can create the Nile, but a sort of foolishness. To imagine that I made the Nile River is no more foolish than our ancestors sort of imagining that they could amass all this gold and all this silver and all this cattle and all these crops without God having freed them from slavery, without God having given them the land itself, without God having granted them rain and soil and sun, all the things that their bounty depended on, to pretend that they won it all themselves. And it's no different than us who glory in our wealth or our careers or our education and don't consider the families that supported us, the social structures and the policies that made these things accessible, the accidents of birth and chance and history and privilege that allowed us to access these things. So the Torah quotes this voice, I think, because it knows that it's a voice that lives inside of us. And to be fair, it's an important voice in the proper proportion. It's a voice that pushes us to strive and to build and to create and even to work to do tikkun olam and repair the world. That requires some koach, right? Some force and some might from our hands in order to do this work. The rabbis, I think, imagine this force to also be called the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. And in the Talmud, famously, the rabbis say the Yetzer Hara is tov me'od. The Yetzer Hara is tov me'od. The evil inclination is very good. Why is the evil inclination very good? In its proper proportion, it pushes us to be ambitious. It challenges us to grow and achieve. So it's not only a bad thing, but when that voice gets too loud, it becomes the voice that wants everything to be mine, that wants the world to revolve around me and my needs, that wants me to be right, and my understanding of the world to be right, and my life and my viewpoint to be the only ones, and everyone else's is unjust and wrong and terrible. So by giving words to that voice, I think Moshe is sort of acknowledging its reality inside of us. He knows that this is going to emerge, and that's the first step, is to admit you have a problem. And then I think the goal is to ask us to slowly transcend that voice, right? The voice is kochi ve'otzem yadi, my might and the power of my own hand. It might live in our hearts, but all the tools and all the rituals of our tradition are there to help us, I think, build slowly beyond that and to slowly expand our sense of interconnectedness and, most importantly, to expand our sense of gratitude. And so every time we say a blessing over the food we eat or the wine we drink, every time we say a blessing thanking God for returning our soul to us in the morning, every time we pray for sustenance, for health, for redemption, for peace, we, I think, in each of those moments recognize how little our strength and the might of our own hands can actually accomplish for us in this world. And so our whole tradition, you might say, is an attempt to sort of slowly grow our circle of concern from me, mine, everything is mine, to beyond ourselves, and to embrace and feel responsible and feel grateful for family and community and people and all humanity and all the world. Shabbat is our tradition's truest and most effective antidote to the disease of mine. Once a week we put down our striving and we, instead of trying to earn and build and do, just let it be. And somehow, even when I'm not answering emails, the world continues to spin. Somehow. And the Nile continues to flow, even when Pharaoh is distracted, And even when his slaves are freed and his army sinks like lead to the bottom of the sea, there goes the Nile. And it turns out that the truest chayil, the wealth, the power, the thing we accumulate, the most true form of chayil comes not from what I win with my might and the power of my hand, but it comes from the stillness that emerges when I'm connected with other people, in prayer, over food, in community, and in quiet rest. So if you hear that voice, which we all have, you can greet it kindly, and you can say, we're going to take a break for Shabbat now, and I'll see you Saturday night. Because the voice needs a Shabbat too, just like we do. Shabbat Shalom.